So mixed methods is a very sexy thing. In this context in particular, what we want to say is that this is not about only using manual ways to do research analysis or only relying on AI. It's actually figuring out when to rely on AI, when to do manual, when to do a little bit both. So this conversation is about that, a little bit of all things mentioned. Okay, so let's just step back from this big abstract concept of using AI for our research analysis and just think of someone. It can be you, it can be your colleague, it can be a UX researcher anywhere in the world. I want you to imagine two things. The first thing I want you to think of is that this person, imagine they rely fully on AI for their research analysis. That's what they do, that's all they do. And the second thing I want you to imagine is that imagine there is a bug, there is some sort of system error, just like Microsoft's blue screen day, right? Where the tools are down. It doesn't work. Big mess, right? It's a big deal. This is where a case like this, where we're using AI for research analysis, really matters. What happens? What are the things that we need to consider? Well, I propose that we think about whether this person in question is a senior UX researcher or a more junior one. It's a relevant question indeed, because maybe a more senior one already has experience with manual methods of doing research analysis. So even when the tools are down, they know what it takes to do it manually. So the seniority will become a factor if this person is well versed in doing research analysis without AI tools. Another thing to focus on is whether they are using AI for a set of actions, or it is that the whole process, like I mentioned earlier, is fully used by AI. That will be an important one, where we're not using yes or no in AI in UX research analysis, but how we are using AI is a big question. And another thing I will want you to think of in this presentation, in this webinar, is the full implications of something like that. Imagine the tool is down, you're on your own for your research analysis. What would be the full implications? Is it going to impact the time it takes for you to deliver your work? Is it going to impact the scope of your work, what you'll be capable of within that time frame? Is it going to improve, or it's going to hurt your biases introduced? What is going to happen as an outcome of that? So these are important questions for us to sort of see, what is the big deal? What happens afterwards? And I think that's a good way to introduce this webinar, to tell you what you're going to walk away with. Something that both Phyllis and I are really passionate about is to provide you with a balanced approach. No, we are not anti-AI, or we are not fully on AI, super excited. We want us to gather this nuanced landscape and figure out, there is good ways to use it, maybe not so good ways to use it. And it's important to have a conversation around it. Another thing that we feel strongly about, and this has been a priority in the way that we've designed this webinar, is to also make it tangible, make it practical, so that it can apply to your day-to-day life as a UX research professional. And the third thing I want to mention is that opinions are my own. And I have a decade of experience doing UX research. My latest full-time job has been a staff UX researcher, UX research manager. But maybe you have an absolutely different angle, an absolutely different set of experiences that make you think another way. That's fantastic. Write your questions and comments in the chat. Like Phyllis said earlier, we'll have a few minutes to do a Q&A. So I would love to also learn from you. So this is not, unidirectional conversation. So you're more than welcome to have your angle as well. So with that said, let me give you a little bit more of an outline. One thing I found important to discuss here is the skill set, right? Now that there is AI, what are the things that senior UX researchers need to update or need to learn, even if they've been practicing over a decade or so on? And what are the things that junior UX researchers, the ones that are new into this field, need to learn? I made the differences of legacy and new. Legacy meaning that these are the skills that senior UX researchers have, and junior ones, even if they can use AI now, they need to still learn these things. Just like the example we shared earlier, there can be a bug, you might be on your own, so some skills need to be gathered, but the senior ones need to also upgrade themselves, because what worked for them in the past doesn't mean that it'll work in the future. So that's one thing. Another one is the practical takeaways that come from the discussion around the skill set. The third thing is worth mentioning is the case study one. I care a lot about transcribing the transcription process. In this case, is interview data, because it's not something maybe only about automating our processes, gaining speed. Maybe there are things over there that we need to pay attention to, the very learnings that come from doing the process manually. So that case study provides us with specific examples to know where to pay attention to in the era of AI when we do UX research. Then the fourth step will be about discussing challenges head on. I made this, differences across the season, the new UX researchers. That's going to be important to mention. And the fifth step is about final questions, considerations, the context, because I'm guessing that about 400 people that registered to this session will work in different organizations of different sectors, different sizes, different localities. So maybe one thing we say about use of AI in research analysis might not be applicable to another one. So the contextual awareness is going to be important to make sense of this session. With that said, let me continue with the skill set. The first one that comes to mind, and that'll be new for both senior and the junior UX researchers, will be about data literacy and interpretation. Now we have the speed to work with large data sets, and we need to have what it takes to interpret those AI outputs, which, like I said, maybe you've been around for 10, 15, 20 years doing UX research, but maybe you haven't really used AI in that sense. So it's going to be an important new skill together. I like to be specific. I like to give clear ideas. So I figure that something like sentiment analysis would be a good one to pay attention to. Imagine that there is this AI generated data output. No, you are gathering feedback from large number of users. Let's say in this case of a restaurant, some people give positive, some people give negative feedback, and there is sort of certain tags around there. No, the reasoning behind those negative or positive feedback. So in this case, of course, the AI generated data output, it'll give you a great opportunity to move fast and also categorize the information that is given. But you still will need to be the one checking for the biases, checking for the gaps, looking back and forth between the raw data and this analysis that is done to see what are the gaps, is the contextual insights gathered correctly, is the tagging accurate, so on and so forth. So this is the part where it's going to be important for us to work comfortably with large data outputs through the AI, but also to know where to bridge the gaps, where to pay close attention to. This is one example that'll be relevant for both new as well as seasoned UX researchers. Another one, I call that legacy, because this is something that senior UX researchers have already been cultivating, and more junior ones, even in the era of AI, should cultivate it more manually. And this is about understanding emotional drivers, context, and motivations. Because let's give an example, right? Let's say we transcribe an interview or usability testing study or diary study or whatever else. We have those words. We are now going to analyze them. But still, there's going to be things around the hesitation of the user or the gaps and silences and certain things where you as a human being, especially a researcher that have significant amount of experience, you'll have something to say about how to interpret that silence, how to interpret that word choice where AI alone might not be able to. So that's an important one to consider. In more visual way, I believe that this piece of cake, a colorful one, will be helpful for us, right? The most outer layer of the cake, let's say the data categorization and summarization, yeah, sure, it can be AI driven, because as a human being, it'll take more time for you. There could be human errors around there. So there is some help to be gained by automating that process by tapping into AI. But the part which I just mentioned earlier in my example about the human input is where emotional drivers, and context will matter. And there we really need your support. We really need your help as a UX research professionals. And even more so when it comes to final insights, the final storytelling, the final bit that goes into the hands of your stakeholders, you are the one that is responsible from it. AI has no agency, has no final responsibility to share that. So these are the parts where there are different layers where you can outsource, whereas you need to have full ownership in the process. One of the favorite subjects coming around here, the part with critical thinking. We all know, right? If somebody is calling themselves a UX researcher, they're all about questioning assumptions like, hey, in this PID document, what do we mean by that? What do we assume for about users' pain points or jobs to be done and all sorts of things? We bring depth in our tech organization. We bring contextual understanding because we are the ones usually the most in touch with our users. So that is there. And if you are a new UX researcher listening to this session, you really need to still gather that, even if you have AI tools today to do your research analysis. So that's a legacy one. We had it in the past, it's in our DNA. We need to keep it to next generations. But the new one, where I'm saying that even if you have years of experience doing UX research, you still need to think further on, is how to handle AI and how to make sure there's an ethical AI use over there. Who defines it? What checkpoints we need to pay attention to? What are the items we need to pay carefully attention to? These are the things we'll cover further in the upcoming slides. But your experience from the past won't help you necessarily with an exactly ethical use that works for your organization, for your ethical guidelines, as well as for your country's policies. So that's an important one. If an AI is hallucinating, how do you deal with that? These are the new set of problems that we now have in this era. So critical thinking needs to be applied in various ways. The way I like to think of it, once again, in visual terms, is like there is this raw data we are gathering in large quantities. Of course, AI will help with the first stage of processing, but with your critical thinking, all boiling down to your final insights, final recommendation, that final understanding, there is that human bit that is increasingly important. So how can we make this conversation more practical? What are other examples or other ways of thinking we can tap into to articulate our stance and our use of AI? One thing that seems to emerge is that if we are not fully pro or against AI, we say that we'll use it, but we'll also be critical in some of the applications, is like, okay, if we can use AI to avoid human errors, increase our speed, let's say to categorize our data, identify patterns and trends and so on, what does it mean about the human part of our work? One example to that is empathy. Empathic abilities, the kind of things that AI alone cannot do. That sort of silence before the user talks, that kind of word choice, that kind of human observations that we have that doesn't really go into AI's toolkit. I like to think of it as a spectrum, right? Because the spectrum is the full scope of your work as a UX researcher. The part that is efficiency, your engineers, your product managers, they will all ask you to deliver quality fast. And being able to organize patterns in your work, for instance, is something that AI can help you greatly. But that's that other end of the spectrum about the empathy, the deeper human understanding. That's the part where AI will not be able to help you. So the question would be, how can you use AI for organizing patterns so that it can free you and your abilities to deep dive into the empathy part, so that your analysis is more balanced, so that you can quality check the patterns generated by AI to make sure that it fits with your observations. When you pull in the raw data, that it makes sense. You are seeing what the gaps are, and the final results are informed by your experience and your abilities to read human behavior and so on. So there is that spectrum of the things we can outsource a little bit and the things that we need to pay close attention to. The other bit is ethics, ethics, ethics. And I feel that in the conversation, since AI tools boomed, ethics has been an important one. Of course, where you live is important. Maybe some of us are connecting from the US, some of them are within the EU zone, some of them are from other parts of the world. Your country, what it finds as ethical will be important. Your company policy is equally important. And of course, your own set of values are important too. AI alone, we cannot outsource the ethical considerations to it. We need to be the ones making sure that the ethical obligations are met. But this is a very challenging concept. How do you know if something is ethical? This is a triangle I'm saying that it has to fulfill. So ideally, we meet in the central point where all the ethical obligations are met. This checklist could be helpful for us within the context of research analysis with the use of AI, right? You look as a researcher, like where the heck is data coming from, the origins of it. Is it the who and the why of data collection? Who collected it? How is it collected? Is it underrepresenting some groups? Being aware of the data sources, knowing that it'll impact how the analysis is made and the final outcome of what is being represented is a starting point. You can stress test your data too to see if there is any bit that is excluded, if any groups are misrepresented, for instance. The other part where I, as a UX researcher, have been always obsessed with is to cross-check things. See if you zero in on certain parts of the data set, certain patterns, and you look at the raw data. Are you seeing any contrasts to what is being presented within the final AI outcome? What are the implications to that? That's also important. And when I say the human contribution, the human part where you take a close look, ideally you also have a diverse team, right? So it's not made up of, for instance, only white heterosexual men in a team somewhere in Europe. You have a diverse team that is more equipped rather to spot biases. And the final one that is also important is not what you work with and how you do the analysis, but also how you transmit that. So you contextualize AI outcomes. You're very transparent to stakeholders, the logic that AI is using, how the analysis takes place, and so on. So the whole process is as transparent as possible. Now is the third part about building your narrative. No, the final message. We talked about it earlier with the cake example being one where humans tell stories to other humans. That's an important part where we can justify why we still need UX researchers in the first place if AI can do the analysis part of research. That's the part where the final human-centered message becomes important because sure, you might be using AI to work with larger data sets, to work faster, to avoid human error, maybe to do more research projects in parallel. But it's going to be very important that the key insights and then those key insights building the final narrative, there is a lot of critical thinking skills involved, your contextual information, your empathy, your understanding of motivations and all those things, making sure that it's part in there will be an important one. So if there's one thing I want you to remember from this section before we go on to next one, is that focus on what makes you human. No, it's sort of obvious, but we might forget that because if AI, let's say, has better tools than a regular human being with working faster with larger data sets and whatnot, that's an area maybe we might not provide a lot of quality. But the parts that we know of, working with empathy, understanding humans in ways that cannot be only transmitted through the words we plug in or the numbers that we plug in, that's the part we can really make a difference. And it's important to focus on that human element. And with that, there's a nice connection with the manual transcription. When we were preparing for this session with Phyllis, we had a conversation and she was like, yeah, but maybe we can tell people in the first place what are the benefits of manual transcription, because maybe some of us are out there and I wouldn't want to know at the end of the session, like, oh, this is lame, like it's just waste of time, why are we just transcribing? But there's so much that could be learned from that process as well, where you might not have paid attention to when you were doing the usability study or running the interview in the first place. That transcription process offers opportunities for reflection too. So this is an important one where there are trade-offs we can explore. So what are the pros? Well, the ones that I just told you earlier. No, you can deeply engage with the material. There is that UX researcher in you that is present in an interview, present in a usability testing, that is performing the act with the end user, but there's another researcher that is transcribing, that is maybe paying attention to details that they might not have paid attention to in the moment. So there's a great opportunity to rethink the research questions, spell out the hidden motivations, understand the environmental factors that you might not really understand while you're in the moment. So the pros, to me at least, are very clear for manual transcription. But what are the cons? It's time consuming, it's prone to human errors. And I hear from many of my coaching clients, as well as the people I work with in other contexts, that now that there is AI tools, there is more pressure given to the UX researchers to deliver results faster, work in more projects, go quick, and all that. So, of course, if you have that pressure, you want to do things manually, it's going to be time consuming. So, there are some trade offs to be made. So, yeah, you might work like a snail. Great learning, but very time consuming. So, what are the ways we can rethink accuracy? What expectations we should set ourselves in the context of manual transcription? Maybe not doing it fully, or maybe not outsourcing it fully, but maybe being able to zoom in and zoom out, do some parts manually and let other parts be, making sure that the consistency is there. That's an important one. So, where does it leave us? Finding a balance that makes sense of you. You'll never hear from me as say like, let's outsource it fully and trust that whatever summary that comes out from that AI driven transcription will be helpful. No, you need to dive in some ways, but maybe diving in and doing it all manually is not scalable, and I understand that too. So finding that middle ground where ethical considerations are met, the accuracy is there as much as possible, but you also mingle with raw data. It sounds like it could be a right approximation. We're almost there. I might be going a bit too fast, or I'll see if there's any later down any questions in chat. But let's spend some time in the challenges bit as well. So there's some challenges unique to people that just started the field as UX researchers. No, remember my first example, when the tools are down, you literally are on your own. And guess what? You've never done things manually. You always relied on tools to tag, to do things, to work with. Polishing your results, interpreting your findings, categorizing them, and so on. So if you over rely on AI tools, and if you're in situations where you cannot access them, or you cannot guarantee that they're ethical and they're not hallucinating and so on, that's a big concern. So it's important to know how to work manually, even if you don't necessarily force yourself to always work manually in that sense. So that's one thing. And there is a big concern that comes with it too, because anytime we work with AI tools, the process tends to be, as well as the outcomes, very polished. It looks very polished, very convenient. So sometimes it's not encouraging us to ask deeper questions to uncover the truth. It's not messy, right? So, but it's important one to nevertheless challenge ourselves and see like, what can we uncover? What might be missing in this process? And that's where the human, well, let's say, talent comes in. There is, however, also challenges, I believe, out there for more seasoned UX researchers, not for all of them, but most certainly some of them, who seem to be categorically against the use of AI tools for research analysis. So here the point is like, hey, maybe for 10 years you've done something in a certain way, and now there's a new tool. Instead of being against it because it's new, exploring it, giving it a chance to figure out in what ways it works and in what ways it doesn't, it's also going to be an important one. So I understand the caution, but it's important to not unquestionably embrace it, of course, but also not reject it entirely. I would like to call it critical openness. You are open because clearly we're evolving, we're learning, but you're also critically open. So it's not like AI at all costs, we gotta be the fastest one in adoption, but you're thinking, you are aware of trade-offs, you are testing things out. So this would be an ideal scenario, right? And what about the challenges that apply to both profiles? One thing is, of course, the ethical awareness. Like, I feel the tension. I've been there too. Your product team wants speed, wants to deliver results, want to experiment things further, but you want to move things ethically. You're in a domain where you don't even know how ethics should look like. So it's important to spend some time into these things and going back to your checklist again, understanding very carefully your country's policy, your country's rules and legislation around it. Your organizations as well as your own, to figure out how can you cross-check your manual reviews, looking into the people and the things and the processes behind the data collection, contextualize AI outcomes a little bit, playing around with it. I think is very important for us to critically engage with the AI tools as we use it for our research analysis. So the ethical bit should be the one where we spend a lot of time. So yeah, this is almost the end. I will say a few more things. And this one was I was mentioning earlier, no, context driven. Everything I said, we cover the skill set, we cover the challenges, we gave some specific examples. We talked about the case study and the challenges unique to senior professionals and seasoned ones. But you know the best where you work, what country you're based, what product you study, with what kind of users. Maybe they are in risk groups, or maybe they are typical consumers of whatever thing and whatever way. So you know the best how this conversation apply to your case. Making sure that your learnings are adjusted to your context will be key to your success and your healthy adoption to AI. So that's important to mention.